Great. Ron?
All right. So first of all, it's a pleasure to see you all joining us for this really interesting session. Actually, if you're going to meet Bijan Shahrokhi, who led the entire establishment called PM Exercises, which is like the best website that I've used millions of times to practice for PM interviews and to help others practice for PM interviews. And this site is amazing, has many answers, many questions. And the best part about it is that whoever manages that, which is the Bijan, is so accessible and has agreed to come here to this session and to share his knowledge with us. So I'm personally super excited for this. I'll let Bijan introduce himself, and then we'll talk about the agenda for today, and then we'll start the interview.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. And like Ron said, PM exercises honestly started off with a simple problem that I had, which was I was just trying to figure out what to do next in order to prepare for my PM interview. And I'll tell you guys the whole story about it later in a presentation, but I'm very excited to be here because, as I've said to Ran and Elena a couple times, the Israeli community in my platform is really strong. And to be honest, I haven't done a market research or anything to know exactly why, but the Israeli community, the Indian community, and the American community in my website are very strong. They're very active and engaged. So it's really a pleasure for me to be here and meet you all in person. Thank you so much for having me.
That's awesome. We are really excited to have you. And the way we're going to structure this session is we are going to have an interview simulation about whatever product question Bijan would like to ask me. And then this will take about 30 to 40 minutes, which will include some feedback about how it went. And also I'll share how I would probably approach it differently. And then after that, we're having a short session of 20 minutes of how to build your roadmap for your PM interviews and how to actually study for stuff, because this PM interviews is probably one of the hardest interviews that there is in tech. And Bijan is going to take all the data that it has on his site and share with us like the best practices and the way to start. And then, of course, we will open it up to Q&A to whoever wants to ask questions about PM interviews. And the best thing about this type of session, the simulation, is that no matter if I get it wrong or right, if I do a good answer or a bad answer, you all joining here are going to learn something, because that's already a benefit. Even if I crush the interview or crash the interview, you're going to have a great time watching me in my chair and learning a lot. So without further ado, I think we should start. Bijan, feel free.
I want to ask you guys. I want to take a great picture with your faces and not with the names on Zoom. So please open your cameras and for 1 minute, I want to see you all together and waving and smiling. And it's so great to see you all here.
Like Barack is doing, okay?
What?
Like Barack. Smile like Barack.
Yeah, smile like Barack. Say PM exercise. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right.
All right, let's get started. So the interview question that Ran, I want to give you is something that I still give to any PM when I interview them. And sometimes I try to narrow it down depending on what particular area I would like to kind of see them have some expertise on. The question is, what's your favorite product? And hopefully the community can see how I can try to make it a little bit harder for you than normal. So you're going to be up for a bit of a challenge, but I think it's going to be a good learning experience for everybody. So the question is, tell me about what's your favorite product? Tell me about one of your favorite products.
Right. So thinking about products that I really like is something that I really like using. And I would have to choose, I think, Duolingo as one of the products that I like most. And the way I look at it is, how do I evaluate products that I like? And I try to see if it fits some categories that I use for evaluation. So first thing that I look for it in good products is the sense that it improves me as a human being step by step. Is so that enables me through like gradual learning to learn something that I never knew I could learn before. So Duolingo does that really well with the fact that you could learn a language, and that sounds like an impossible task when you start out, but then bit by bit you manage to learn more and more words. And I think the second thing is, when I look for great products, is that it fits into my day-to-day routine. So I would look to evaluate products as not something that I have to invest a lot of effort into using, but rather this integrates quite seamlessly to life. And I think Duolingo did quite a good job about how to integrate that into the small bits of learning, which I think is really also connects to the first point, but also fit into my day. So if I'm waiting for the hypothetical bus, then I can actually use that for 5 minutes, and that could actually promote me towards an ambitious goal. And the third criteria I use is that it generates like real impact in the real world, and it's not just something that is super fun to use, but I cannot take it out from outside the virtual world. So when I look at a good product, I want to see that it brings an impact to my real life, not just my virtual life. If I say so. I think when you look at Duolingo, is you really get that sense that you first of all gradually improve as you go along. The improvements happen whenever you are, and it fits your habits and it fits right into your day-to-day routine. And the third thing is that when you look back, you see that you made a true impact on your real life. So you can suddenly communicate in a new language you didn't know before. This is how I look at it. Like I really like Duolingo.
Got it. Can you give me another favorite product?
Oh, okay. Another favorite product. So again, if I were to evaluate through the same lens, I'll probably go with another product that I use quite oftenly, which is YouTube. And when you look at YouTube as a product, like I said, first of all, I want to look at something that brings me as in gradual bits towards a learning goal. So when I look at YouTube, especially the way I use YouTube personally, is to learn new materials. So when I want to learn how to do email marketing, or when I want to learn how to use that iMovie software to edit movies, then I have an objective, and it doesn't have to be like a learning objective, but I'm usually coming to YouTube for an objective. And the second thing is that, like I said, with the Duolingo app, if I'm trying to project the same way, is that you could learn a lot by things that integrate with your day-to-day life. So what YouTube does really well to me is that it provides you the ability to actually select both the most interesting content and also the content that you have time for. So I know that if I'm time bound, then I know that I need to focus on specific videos, and I can see which videos are shorter, which videos are longer. And if I'm not time bound, I can like binge through a topic that I really like. And the third thing is that same thing here, is that it's such a powerful tool to bring an impact to real life. So you can actually learn something about it that actually impacts your life. And I think they are doing quite a good job at actually giving you what you want to learn. And you can actually search for what you want to learn, and you can actually find videos that might match your needs.
Got it. I'm going to ask this one last time. Can you give me one more product?
So third time. Okay, let me scratch through my head. You had me at Duolingo and YouTube. All right, so another product I really love using, and I'm not using it today as often as I would like, but nonetheless I used it constantly in my day-to-day life before COVID-19. Is I would choose Audible, Audible by Amazon. So the product that enables you to purchase books and hear books and listen to them while you are on the go, while you are doing other things. And I think what I really like best about it is again, if I use my evaluation criteria, then it fits quite nicely, and I can elaborate on that. But I think ultimately it brings the one thing that it doesn't do is compared to YouTube or Duolingo is that I feel that I could less take the insights and implement it on the real world. If I look at like the first and second criteria that I use to evaluate, so it's definitely easy to have bite-sized information and to grow and learn like a new skill, because the same way you learn a language or same way you learn a DIY skill from YouTube, you can do it with Audible. It does have a change on the habits that I use, so it fits right into my schedule. Whether I'm on the bus, then I don't need to do anything. I don't need to be in a specific surroundings to consume the content. But I think with regards to impact in the real world, maybe that's not as good. So you get a lot of impact from books, but it's not as practical, depending on the books, obviously, but it's not as practical as like watching how to do something on YouTube or how to speak that kind of sentence in Spanish, for example.
Got it.
So
I'm curious to know how you would describe what is the problem statement in your opinion that Audible is trying to solve?
that's a good question. So um, are you just want to clarify? Do you mean the problem statement? You're looking for the problem statement for the user, or do you
Yeah,
look for a problem statement for the business side?
yeah, for the user. I'm trying to kind of figure out, like from your perspective, what is that user pain point that Audible is trying to address?
Mm. So I think there are a few user segments that could actually use Audible. So the way I look at it is let's call it users who use it for career growth as a way to get up to speed with the latest books on a specific topic. They don't have much time, and they use that as a way to amplify their learning. So that's probably one user segment. Another interesting user segment, and this is something that I've met from my grandpa who just passed away actually, is that he had a real serious eye issues, and he was visually impaired, and the way he consumed books was through Audible. This was his only way to consume because he could not see, he could not read. So I would look at like visually impaired people as probably another segment. And another interesting segment that I lately found is actually kids. So during COVID, we actually pivoted to kids books, and this is some nice way for my 5-year-old to learn a bit of English with obviously with the help of myself. But that could be also an interesting segment for them.
So I'd like to see you picking one segment and then thinking about how you would improve Audible. So let's say you're the PM at Audible, and you've been asked to make it better. So how would you go about making it better?
All right. So just so I will be clear, by better, could you please clarify what you mean?
You can pick any objective or goal that you may have in your mind. You can choose that.
All right. So when I look at Audible from their what is the value that they give to the users is essentially is the ability to consume knowledge. And if I look at it from the PM perspective, is if I would like to put a metric on that, it would probably be something like books completed, or something of that sort, like the number of books completed or the interval between the end of the first book and the start of the second book. So these are probably two metrics that I would look at. And as a metric to see that like I'm not delivering value is probably like the abandonment rate of books. So this is how I would look. I would look at like what is success. So if I need to choose like one metric to actually move the needle on, then I would probably look at the completion of books. And as far as so, if it's okay, I want to focus on that area to improve.
I'm curious to know why you think completion of books is important in improving, let's say, Audible?
So I think it serves a few needs. One thing is about the fact that from the business side, first of all, completion of a book implies that there is more chance that the user is satisfied with the platform and will continue to pay the subscription he's paying to get the next book next month. So that's from the business perspective. And the second thing is from the user's perspective, is that ultimately what we are trying to do is we're trying to reach a learning to learn the content of a specific book. We chose a book because we want to know what's inside. And the way we know that we've actually maxed out this potential is the completion rate of the book. If I would, for example, if I would take the other approach and maximize the skipping to the next book, the interval to the next book, then what I might create is incentives for users to rush through a book and not just to get it from end to end. And this could also be a good approach, but I think that when we talk about the value, the value of the book as a complete book, I think brings an interesting, a more interesting way to look at it.
Got it. Okay, sounds good. So we've decided that that's one thing that we want to really focus on improving. So let's just go down that path and then now think about what are some of the things that we can do to drive that number.
All right. Do you want me to actually focus on a specific segment? Do you have preferences for which segment to focus on?
You can choose one. Feel free to pick one, and then we can kind of go down that path.
All right. So if I recall correctly, the segments that I've discussed is let's call them the ambitious career readers. Second one is the visually impaired, and the third one is the kids audition.
Okay.
I'm trying to think with regards to the way that, like, who is the target or the main target audience for Audible, and I think that the way, so when I look at, for example, I'm trying to look at other segments. So when I'm looking at, for example, visually impaired, specifically in the country that I live in Israel, there are libraries designated for visually impaired, and there's also other aids that they receive to actually read books and different steps. And I think this is probably even maybe a smaller segment with regards to the size of the target audience. And with kids, I think there's a bit of a disconnect between who is, first of all, who is purchasing and who is using. And the second reason I think choosing kids is less of an interest is because kids books are naturally shorter, and that way is promoting the completion of a story is something that starts and usually ends within a day or a few days, and I think that's less of the problem we're trying to solve. So by elimination, this leaves me with the ambitious career growth, and I think it's also the biggest target market. So I would like to focus on that, if that's okay.
Got it. So sounds good. So you wanted to focus on which particular user group? I just want to make sure that I understood you right.
So I want to focus on the ambitious career growth, the people who are very, very busy. They want to read new books and get updated in what is new in their industry, but they don't have a time to actually sit down, read a book, and they do it on the go.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, sounds good. Let's focus on that and see how we can improve it.
All right, so if that's okay, I want to take like a minute to jot down some ideas. So I try to look at it from the pain points perspective of that specific segment. And the first two pain points that came to mind when I looked at this segment is the first problem is that they don't know which book to actually choose in order to start that. So they have very short time to invest, and they don't want to waste their time on a book that is not as good. Okay, so again, we're focusing on improving the completion rate of a book, and in order for us to improve the completion rate, we want to give a book that is quality to them and that is not wasting their time. And from their perspective, the problem is that they don't know what to choose, and so they will max their time. And the second thing is, which I think is even a bigger pain point, is the fact that since they're doing this on the go, while they're washing dishes, while they're on the bus, while they're waiting for an elevator, is that they constantly move in and out of focus and in and out of context. And I think what I assume we can see that, so we can see if this is a problem before where the real PM for that. I would look at how many repeats is my user actually activating. So Audible has these 30-second back or 1 minute back. I will try to measure to see if this is a real problem. But provided that getting out of context and in context to a literature on the subject, on a like a subject matter which is quite heavy, then I would assume that this is a problem, because this prevents the completion rate, because you're constantly hearing the same sentence because you went in and out of context. And so with your permission, I think this would be a much interesting problem, as opposed to actually recommendation, because I think, first of all, recommendation is something that is quite common. So we have other alternatives to actually ask our friends, ask our fellow PMs, what book you're reading right now, read online, look for reviews. There are cues for us to actually choose this. So maybe that's less of an interesting problem compared to the context switching, which I think this is a really interesting problem to solve. Do you have in mind something else?
No, that's okay. We can go down that path of trying to improve, address this pain point that you've come up with.
All right. So when I look at context switching, I want to think of some solution for that problem. All right, so I thought of a few solutions which we can do, and I'm looking at the problem of context switching, and there's a few ways to look at it. So one way is to think about like before I'm losing the context, okay, before I'm getting out of context, and the second is how I get back to context. So features that I had in mind, first thing is audio summary. So whenever I open the app, it gives me a summary of the last few minutes of what's in this chapter, giving me like a audio map of where I am. Like I'm in this chapter, we have just discussed the following A, B, C, and now we are talking about methodology D. So that would be like, I would call that like audio summary. Second thing is about like finding when the user is losing the context, starting to lose the context because he's focused more on the dishes or something like that, is what if we could do some sort of a dynamic rhythm? So we start to maybe slow down the pace after a few minutes of listening, and we can see if the user is interacting with us or not. So if he doesn't, then eventually he will start to hear that something is being weaker, then you will stop. And I would say for this is the caveat is that it might annoy users. It might be like users of actually high intent and high focus it might annoy them. So we need to think about how we can solve that problem. And the last thing is that books, if I look at the book as a whole, there are some like key areas or key insights within a book. And maybe I could think of some sort of way to highlight that with an audio. So saying like, hey, here is an important insight, or prompting the user to actually, hey, listen up, something of that sort. And the way I can do it is I can look at, for example, since I'm Amazon and I know that people are reading on Kindle and are already like bookmarking like sentences, I can actually use that data to actually say, okay, here is an interesting part, listen up. This is something like that a lot of people actually marked as interesting, and we can use the synergy of like Kindle with Audible and then actually say, hey, look, this is super interesting for you.
Got it.
So
Yeah, I think that's an interesting idea. And let's assume that you went out, you did your research, and you came up with a pretty good UX for basically kind of doing some sort of a nudge to the user that informs them, hey, pay attention, this is an important part. You implemented it. Now, how would you determine whether or not this feature has been a success? What would be your ways of determining that?
mhm. Okay, so I think when we discussed again, I want to connect back to the goal. Is our goal is to reach completion of books. So what I would look at is I would look at a few metrics. So when I now think of it, actually a completion of a book is a lagging indicator to the fact that the user actually was in context. Okay, so I will try to think of maybe finding some sort of leading indicator that will actually indicate whether the user is going to end the book or not. And the way I would look at it is the number of repeats the user is doing in a specific episode. So I will try to measure the number of re-hearing the same sentence as the metric that I want to reduce to as much as possible. This would indicate that the user kept in context. So this is how I would know whether I'm successful or not, is if I manage to get that number down per user per book.
Got it, got it. This is great. Thank you so much. And if we had more time, I would have given you another question. I would try to do also maybe throw in a problem solving question and ask something like, you realize that people are using it, but then all of a sudden somebody comes in and says, let's say, the number of people that have been repeating or have been completing all of a sudden dropped by 50%. And what would you do next? But now we don't have the time. So, but if we did, that would be a question that could be a good follow-up question to kind of test your analytical abilities to kind of identify and pinpoint the issue and then come up with a solution for it. But I'll give you some feedback on the overall structure of the answer. First of all, I think your overall structure was good. You came up with three different products. And the reason I asked what's your next favorite product is I've seen in my interviews that people usually have an answer for what's your favorite product. And I'd love to get people out of their comfort zones and kind of like make them think a little bit. And this goes with a lot of questions like, what's your strength? What's your weakness? Tell me about a time when you did this. Tell me about a time when you did that. Because people usually have this kind of attitude of, oh, I know how to answer this, blah, blah, blah. And then what happens is I'm kind of thinking, okay, you've practiced this, like I want to give you something else. So that was the reason that I tried to kind of give you multiple questions, kind of ask you for what's your next favorite product. But I'd say that you identified a good product. You explained, what the product does. I'll have some feedback for you in a minute on that. And then you broke down the users into multiple user groups, which is important. And I'll give you some feedback on that in a minute as well. And then you identified some pain points that really started from the user. And I think that's really important that you didn't say things like, we're trying to optimize revenue or this is what would be in the best interest of Audible and things like that. So I'm glad that you kind of took a very user-centric approach. And then you came up with a metric, and that's really important that at the end we have a metric. But let me start off by giving you some feedback. So on the first part, when you were asked what's your favorite product, I'd love to hear an answer that's very brief and concise, and it's about the user. So for example, in the case of, let's say, Audible, sorry, in the case of Duolingo, the answer could be something as simple as, I'd love to, I think the problem that existed was that it wasn't easy for people to learn a new language anywhere, anytime. And this was really painful because you had to go to YouTube, you had to go search, or you had to go get a coach or a mentor and pay a lot of money and sign up to classes. It was just not easy. And what I love about Duolingo is if I have 5 minutes and I'm in the lineup, let's say for a bus, or I'm lined up to get a coffee, I can actually use that to learn a language. And it has made it basically a lot more fun and engaging than other cases, because they've also added this additional layer of gamification to it. So I'm really kind of like starting off with the problem statement from a user side, and then I'm saying how they've been able to really solve that really well.
That's a
What
good
I would
point.
have, yeah, that's what I would have done. Kind of start off with the user pain point, and then kind of say how the solution really addresses that. I would say I have the same feedback actually for the YouTube idea and Audible as well. I think you spoke to the user pain point throughout your answer, but it wasn't like, right in my face right away. Like, YouTube, the problem is it's not easy to discover content, video content. There's so many video content out there. And I think YouTube has done an amazing job by solving this in basically by addressing two key user experiences. One is search, and the other one is just like kind of knowing what you want so that as soon as you land on your homepage, they're presenting to you the right content. So you're kind of starting off with the problem, and you're saying how YouTube, as a really good company in managing data and organizing data, has been able to kind of use their abilities to solve that better than anybody else.
No, I think that's great. I think this is a great point, actually.
Yeah, so I'd say that was one thing, but overall, like I said, you talked about it throughout your answer, but I think maybe it could have been more kind of, there could be more focus on the user pain point side. And then when we talked about the pain point, I think, so the metric, I would wonder if completion rate of a book is a key metric, because there is also this group of users that potentially might not want to complete books, but they're still engaged and happy with the book. Like, I'm the kind of person, for example, myself, that reads about 80% of a book. And I don't know if it's good or bad, but it's a user behavior, right? So perhaps I would have said something along the lines of time spent on Audible, because if people are spending more time on Audible, that's an indication of engagement, and that's an indication of value that they're receiving from the book. But I think you could say it's completion rate, but have a strong argument for why completion rate is important. And you can say that maybe that's important for the segment of the users that we've seen that once they complete a book, they start their next book. Or if they don't complete a book, they get stuck in that book and they don't start another book. And for that reason, for that particular segment of the market, maybe it's very important. Something along those lines.
I think that's interesting, because on that subject of a time spent, this would have been counterproductive when I answered like with a feature. Maybe I need to start with that, because the way I want to reduce context switching is essentially I would lower the time spent effectively, because I'm giving users more like a fluent experience throughout. But that's a good point. I think the fact that I ignore the fact that users need to complete a book, I think that's an assumption that I shouldn't have made, or at least made it explicitly. I think that's a great point.
Yeah. And I mean, the kind of one way to think about it is always like kind of thinking from a user journey, right? And sometimes it's hard to remember the user journey, or kind of go through it in our head very quickly during the 20 or 30 minutes. And sometimes our user journey is different than somebody else, as long as we have some sort of a clarification that, hey, for that particular user journey, I think that's important. then maybe that's okay. So that was another thing that I noticed. And then I think you talked about the 3 user groups. I like how you described briefly what they are, and then you kind of went a little bit more detail into the third one that you decided that you wanted to focus. I think that's really good. Ideally, you kind of go at a high level about the different user groups, and then you spend a lot more time describing the characteristics and the user journey of the particular user group that you want to focus, just because you have limited time. And then on the 3 ideas, like I personally really liked your third idea. I thought it was a really interesting idea. I think there are more metrics that you can kind of potentially consider in terms of value. So for example, it could be things like, does the time spent on a book increase because of the nudge? Or does the engagement session increase, because of the nudge, and things like that. And that would be interesting to also know. But I think you could also kind of talk from with your metrics, the metrics that you mentioned as well. Overall, I think it's very important to have a good idea of how to answer the favorite product question. It says a lot about the candidate. And depending on what position you're applying for, that question could change. So for example, like I ask people, like, what's your favorite fintech product? Because I'm in fintech. I ask them, what's your favorite, banking mobile app? Things like that. So it could be very, very narrowed and focused, but the learning is still there. And I think the hiring manager will learn a lot about, how big you think, how strategic you think. Are you starting from the users? Like, do you have the right metrics to really measure whether or not your improvement is a success? So that's why I think favorite product question is one of those questions that's worth a lot of practicing.
Wonderful. I think that's great feedback. I hope it's okay. I hope I passed. Anyway, I think another thing that I would do on top of what you've said is when we discuss solutions, I think something that I didn't do in the answer, and now in retrospect, I think I should have, is talked about like a phased approach towards actually checking that this is moving the needle in the right way. So when I answered about, for example, the audio summary, something that could be a better answer was to say, and I'm going to check it by, I don't know, choosing a selection of books and doing it on that books and seeing if that impacts, or a selection of users or something like that, that would show a phased approach toward the fact that it's not like I throw a big feature and see if it works. No, I do it as a phased approach. I
Yeah.
think that's one thing that could have been improved, and to always try to summarize like the answers. Like, we have talked about the user segments, we've talked about the pain points. Now let's think about solutions, and I think this could have also been more structured.
Yeah, and you would have probably been also expected to talk a little bit about the pros and cons of the ideas, just because of limitation of time. I didn't kind of ask a lot of questions on that, but I would have probably, if I was giving that answer, I would have said, when I do the evaluation, I'd say, the first idea is probably going to be more work than others, because there's expectation that every content creator to have a book summary, and we need to basically go ahead and create all these content. And I don't know if our AI tool is where it could be to really create like high quality content. For that reason, I think it's a little bit hard to implement, and that's why I'm excited about the third one, something like that.
Great. These are great points. All right, so I finished the interview. We passed that part of this. I hope you all learned something new from this conversation. What we're going to do right now is we're going to have a presentation by Bijan about the site and about how to practice product management interviews, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A.
All right, sounds good. So I'll share my screen with you all. Let me know if if you can see my screen.
Yeah, everything's all right.
All right, great. So I'll get started. So the things that I'll talk about is a little bit about PM exercises. And I think the story of PM exercises, to me, in my opinion, is like the story of how a new product should be really built. It was totally accidental. There's no, grand product vision or anything at the beginning, and kind of things are figured out as time went by. I'll talk about why it's challenging to break into the PM world, and how do you become a PM and land your PM job, and finally, why the interview processes are the way they are and how you can prep for them. So hopefully this kind of goes over all the key things that matters to you guys. So the first version of the site, to be honest, it was just like a WordPress blog. I created it in one night when I was trying to prep for my own interview. And I kind of got frustrated by not knowing how to prep and what the right frameworks were, and what do I do next. So I just posted the first exercise on the site and published my answer. And I think the first question, I can't remember, to be honest, what it was. I think it was, how would you improve Google Maps, if I'm not mistaken. And I published it. I posted a link on Reddit. I went to bed. I didn't study for my interview. I woke up in the morning and I saw 12 people telling me this is really cool and this is very exciting. So kind of turned into this habit of posting one question per day, posting an answer. Then a few days later, people started posting answers and giving feedback. And then they told me a couple days later, a couple months later, that Bijan, why are you the only one who can post questions? We want to be able to post questions as well. And I was like, that's a very interesting question. I didn't think about that. So I turned it into a Q&A platform where anybody could post questions. And to be honest, this was all a hobby. Like, I had my full-time job, pretty demanding at a tech startup in SF. But I just loved it. It was like so much fun for me to engage with the community. And it was also a really great learning experience for myself, because sometimes when I wanted to publish an interview guide, I had to really understand how to do well, let's say, in product improvement, in order for me to kind of say what that framework should be. And over time, it became basically this really gigantic database of interview questions with highly engaged community. And later in 2019, people then said, you got all these great frameworks and you got all these interview questions and content, but we really need to really put this all together. So can you put some sort of like kind of a course that's talking about all the things all the frameworks, like, what are the mistakes you shouldn't be making? For example, can you dig deeper a little bit into what's your favorite product and things like that? So that brought me to the next version of the website, which was basically, give me one second, actually it's one slide before that. Go to, give me one second. Oh, there we go, right here. So it basically got me to launch a new version of the site. And this new version of the site was really thinking about the user journey of a product manager from the beginning to the end. Things such as exercises were a lot more interactive. You could request other active members to post an answer to a question you published. There was some anonymity that people were asking. They wanted to be anonymous when they shared some sort of content. We enabled that. And then we added more engagement, more gamification to it. And that kind of made the platform a lot more, because one of the feedback that I was receiving on the previous version was the content is good, but it's kind of boring. The interface is boring. I was like, okay, great. So I'll try to address that. And it's interesting, all this time I still have my full-time job, because to me the goal wasn't to really optimize for revenue or profit. Really, the goal was to optimize for helping a lot of people to succeed in their PM interviews. And we've had a lot of good success. That's great. And we're still in that phase of, to be honest, like expanding on the pain points that exist in the PM interviews. I think there is actually, there are so many pain points that I'm just so excited about what's ahead of us for 2021. We have a really interesting product roadmap, and a lot of the things that we'll be launching are basically the results of my understanding of the pain points that exist in the PM interview process. So that's pretty, I think, cool. And for me, it's also great because it's been a really good learning experience for me as well. But now we have coaching from PMs from top tech companies. We just passed 30,000 members on our platform, and our target is 60,000 by the end of the year. And we just launched a new feature called Discussion Forum, where people can ask any questions they might have. This is different than the interview questions. This is like things like, like what's the difference between, Google and Facebook, let's say, for a PM? Like, where would you go first if you had an option? Or what's the salary range, let's say, for like Google, things like that. So it's more for like kind of casual conversations, and it's going to help people to, share their knowledge with each other. And we're going to continue down this path. And I think what's important is for us to kind of remember why it's hard for people to really get a PM job, especially if they're not a PM. I think part of it is because of all these problems that exist, the pain points that exist in the PM interview journey, PM interview preparation journey. But part of it is also because of what companies expect, and it's very unfair. And to be honest, I'm guilty of that too. I'm looking for, I'm trying to hire right now 2 to 3 PMs, and I'm only looking for people that have previous PM experiences. But I'll talk to you guys how you can create that. I don't think that's the end of the world. What we should be thinking about is that to become a PM, you can just be one. And thank God we live in a world where we can just build our own product, and we can build a product for ourselves. It doesn't mean that we need to have a product that is used by thousands of people or millions of people. We can just like build a product that makes sense for us. It could be something as simple as like a clock app, or a clock, just a clock, or like something that's like very simple. But what that's going to do for you is it's going to make you go through the whole basically product management lifecycle. And that means ideation, thinking about what is the idea that you got, thinking about how you're going to turn that into reality. Then, thinking about what do I need to build first? How do I prioritize things? Then you probably need to go hire a product designer, engineer, to think about, how do you actually turn your vision into a reality? You have to do some user testing to make sure that what you've designed is actually usable by the users. And along the way, you're going to run into all kinds of issues, whether it's budget constraints, or designer quitting, saying, oh, I got another job that's more interesting, I'm not interested in doing, let's say, contract work for you, or engineers saying that this is too hard to build, I don't know how to do this. And these are all the things that product managers actually deal with on a daily basis. So I think the best way to learn is actually to be one and pick a product and build it. It's kind of like learning how to swim and learning how to ride a bike. You don't know until you do it. So my suggestion is, if you're thinking about, how do I learn to be one, just build a product and you learn a lot along the way. And so let's say that you've built a couple products and you come to an interview, and because of that, you get an interview. And it's very likely that you do, because what hiring managers are looking for is to see that you have a interest in kind of being a product person. And that's actually the best indication of that, is that you've done something interesting in your free time. That tells me that you're actually passionate about product management. So let's say that you've done that, your resume talks to your experience as a PM in previous jobs, or your experience as a PM in your free time, and you get an interview. And now what I want to do is to really think about your abilities to kind of do the whole product management. And that means thinking about the users of a product that you've been assigned to manage, being able to prioritize certain users over the others, the ones that are more important for whatever strategic reason. You're able to identify some pain points and problems that are probably kind of hidden. It's not very obvious. And you decide that you're going to solve them with some like novel ideas. I think, to me, that's an indication that you're a product person that can solve the right problem. And that's very important. And then you have the analytical mindset to, measure and determine the impact of the product or the change that you're trying to introduce to the product. And you're able to turn all this into some sort of an operation that has a positive outcome for the business, whether it's profitability, and it might just be growth. It might be that the company is like, highly focused on growth. Like if you, for example, were working at Uber in 2015, profitability probably was not important. They would have rewarded you for coming up with growth ideas, right? So, can you come up with ideas that turn this, the impact into something really positive, like, for example, growth of the business. And finally, can you convince everybody across the organization to achieve your goals? And that's really important because everybody's busy. And we PMs are in this like weird position where we don't have authority over people, but we have a lot of responsibilities. And if something goes wrong with the product, we're expected to give an answer. But at the same time, people that help us build the product, they don't necessarily report to us. So it's important for the hiring manager to really evaluate your skills in that area and see how you can convince them of certain things. So, when I ask you, for example, tell me why this particular user group is more important than the other, I want to see if you can convince me or anybody else across the organization that your decision is the right decision and your judgment is right. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to be very influential. And if the team doesn't have the trust and respect for you, your product is not going to be able to achieve its objectives. So now that, let's say, what the interviewers are looking for, it might be more obvious why we have this kind of a crazy interview process. And before I get into how to prep for it, I want to say that I've seen enough evidence to say people that do well in the PM interviews do well in their jobs as a PM as well. And the contrary is also, it's not always true. So like I've seen people that are great PMs, but they don't do so well in their PM interviews. And it's unfortunate, but I've seen that people that do well in their PM interviews always do well in their jobs as a PM. And for that reason, because it's so costly to have a false positive on a hire, the tech companies are very conservative, and they've kind of adopted this model of expecting you to do well in all these different types of interview questions, because they think that if you do well in there, you're going to do well in your job. So how do you prepare for it, for the interview? And I know it's kind of scary because there's so many different categories of questions: product strategy, metrics, problem solving, improvement, analytical, all that. I think the best way to do it is just like to pick one category at a time, so that you don't get stressed out or overwhelmed with all this different new information, and try to go really deep on that one particular category, and only go to the next one if you feel like you're in a good shape and you can kind of pay attention to the next category. So how do? You pick one category. I started with estimation myself because I had an engineering background, and I thought it's going to give me a quick win, and it's going to make me feel positive and kind of give me the confidence that I need. Or you can pick something like product improvement, which is pretty hard. But if you do well in product improvement questions, you can pretty much do well in many other categories, because a lot of the other categories have like kind of some sections that are very relevant to product improvement. Maybe if I was kind of starting out all over, I would have started with product improvement, just to kind of start with the hardest one. But at the time, I just felt like I wanted something that's easy as a start. So I started with estimation. Read a lot of guides, and PM Exercises had a lot of guides, but my site is not the only one. There are other guides out there too. And make sure you look at a lot of the questions and answers that are provided by people. This is a kind of a good way for you to get an understanding of what sort of answers are expected from interviewees. And every time you're not sure why they went down this path of answering a question in this way, well, you can kind of go back to the interview guide and really get a better understanding of whether or not that approach was right or wrong. And the way you put this all together is by doing a lot of practicing. And to be honest, I've seen people that have done 150, 200 mock interviews before they go for an interview at Facebook or Google. And I think it's important for you to only do an interview with a really, really good company like Google, Facebook, or Atlassian, or some of the other top tech companies. If you feel the confidence that if you have the confidence that you think you're going to do well. Otherwise, it's totally acceptable by the hiring committee or the HR person to be told that, hey, I need another month or two because I want to prep for the interview. They're used to hearing that. That's not going to go towards your evaluation process whatsoever. And at any point, if you're not sure, oh, I'm not sure if I didn't know how to answer this question that I was given, let's say by another peer, go back to the interview guide, maybe even post your answer in the, in a community, like, hopefully it's in PM exercises. We'd love to have you guys there, and then wait for people's feedback. And the more you kind of go through this whole cycle, the more you understand, why there's this kind of framework that people are recommended to follow. And over time, you learn to not always necessarily follow the framework and adjust if needed. And finally, you reach a point where you feel like people are telling you, oh, your answers are really good. Or like when you do a mock interview, people say it was great. And that's a sign that, okay, now it's time for me to think about another category and another interview question type. So I want to emphasize that there's so many different categories. Don't try to do all at once. It's going to be overwhelming. Pick one, try to do well, and then move on to the next one. And then get help along the way, if you feel like you're kind of stuck in there. So that's the presentation. I hope you guys found it valuable. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Like, I'd be happy to answer anything. And I've also put together a voucher for the community for people at becoming product managers. If you guys are interested, please feel free to sign up to the platform. We have both like a free membership and a premium membership. The premium membership has access to more interview questions, more course content. You can practice with other PMs. So the next 100 subscriptions, they come in with this promo code from the community. We're offering 20% off. Hope you find it valuable. Other than that, usually at PM exercises, feel free to sign up for a free account there. Yeah, let me know if you have any questions or anything.
Oh, wonderful. So Bijan, thank you very much for both the interview simulation and this great presentation. So guys, feel free to chime in, ask your questions. We'd love to hear that, and then we'll end off this session. So you could also write in the chat if you feel more comfortable, and we will ask the questions. That's totally cool as well.
All right, somebody asked for the link, so let me just provide the link. Give me 1 second.
I will send the link in the chat.
Oh, will you? Okay, perfect.
All right, so who wants to go first?
There's a question about take-home assignments. And yeah, that's a good question. So I do have a template for take-home assignments. So one thing I will say about take-home assignments is that typically people are told, please don't spend more than 3 hours or 5 hours for your take-home assignment. And to be honest, I think that you should, like, my advice is for you to optimize for doing really well in the interview process rather than optimizing for time or really following the guidelines. So when I was getting my first PM job at a tech company, I took 3 days from my full-time job to do well in my take-home assignment. And I know I spent a lot more time than they expected, but the outcome was I got the job. They were really impressed. And there's this line that I read on from one of the Google PM executives that always like kind of stuck with me. He said, there are 2 types of employees. There are the ones that you need to check their work when they deliver their work. And there are the ones that impress you with their work every time you assign them with something. And I've decided that every time I'm given a take-home assignment, I just want to belong to the second group. I just want to impress them so much that it is just almost like a no-brainer for them to give me a job. So, what's the framework for that? I would say the framework is not that different than a particular PM interview question type, like product improvement questions. But because you're given more time, you're expected to be making less assumptions and more kind of talking about facts and things such as I did user research with 3 users, and this is what I understood is the user journey, and these were the pain points that came up. Because that's telling me as a hiring manager that you are really thinking about you're really thinking about the user experience as a whole, and you're kind of discovering the pain points that way. So that would be my suggestion, is to really try to spend a lot more time on it. And instead of making a lot of assumptions, try to use your PM skills like you would have at your full-time job to do a quick, basically, have a fact-based decision-making process in your presentation. Let me see what other questions. I think the next question was which books would you recommend to prepare? So there is one book that I thought was really interesting in kind of shaping my perspective as a PM. And I've shared that with a few people in my community. The book is called The Mom's Test. And for some reason, it's not like very, very popular, or maybe it is now, but the book is basically about the whole idea that if you ask your mom, hey, mom, if I build this product, would you use it? She'd be like, yes, honey, that's a great idea. I would definitely use it. And you feel great about it. But in reality, if you ask their question in a different way, in the form of user experience and what they would have done, their answer would have been different. So, I'll give you an example. Let's say you're doing some research on, whether or not people eat healthy food, and you're trying to think about an idea on the healthy food industry. If you ask me, Bijan, do you eat healthy food? I'll tell you yes, I do eat healthy food. But if you ask me, what did you eat last night? I might tell you I ate pizza. So it's very interesting how my wishes are very different than my behaviors. And as a good PM, you want to focus on behaviors. You don't want to focus on intentions because it's very hard to really know what people's true intentions are. And when I thought about it this way, it made it so much easier for me to understand the user experience, to understand the pain points, because the conversation is no longer about tell me about a problem or tell me about a feature that you want to build. It's about tell me about the last time you interacted with my site, or tell me about the last time you tried to prepare for your PM interview. And the dynamics really changes. It's so interesting because now they're just like telling you about things that they don't even know is a pain point. But when I hear it as somebody who's watching it, I discover there's a pain point. An example that I can think about this is that Samsung a few years ago was trying to think about how do they make their TVs better. And they did a lot of market research. They asked people, what's the next feature you'd like to build? And then they decided, let's focus on remote control. So they asked a lot of questions on remotes, and still nothing very unique came up. And then they started watching how people interact with their remotes. And they realized one of the biggest pain points with remotes was people were losing it around the house all the time. And it would take them so long to find it. So if you ask somebody what's the problem with the remote, they'll never bring this up as a problem because they're probably even ashamed of it. And they find it as some sort of shortcoming from their side. Whereas if you observe how people interacted with the remote, or if you ask them, how did you interact with the remote last time, you might find out things that you wouldn't have found out otherwise. So I think that's a really interesting book that I highly recommend everybody to read. It kind of really, I think, shifted my perspective on product management and kind of made me realize how important it is to always start from the user.
That's a great one. So, okay, we are going to conclude the session. One thing I want to share with you guys is that you have asked about home assignments. We have a dedicated course for that. Elena shared the link to register if you'd like. We are just launching this next course, and we have some spots available right now. I want to take this time to thank Bijan for this great session. I learned a lot. I really enjoyed it. I hope you all did. Thank you for clearing your time and schedule for meeting us with the community, and we are super excited to host you. And we wish you good luck with reaching 60 or even 100K community members. We hope we can help.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. It was really a pleasure, and I'm so glad that I met you all. Please come hang out at PM Exercises, and keep up the great work, Ran and Elena. I've been watching you guys grow in the past 1 year, and it's been really impressive. So well done.
Thank you, Bijan. And we will send the link for the recording along with the website link and the discount code Bijan shared with us, so you can subscribe if you want. So you will get the link in your inbox.
Sounds
all right.
good.
Have a great evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank
Have
you
a
very
great
much.
evening all.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.